Hi everyone, welcome today to this course about understanding mass media effect, and we are going to try to explain to you the process and influences of mass communication in general. So as you know, over a number of years, research in the field of media effect has underscored the potential power of the visual images and their the degree of impact and how they exert diverse and multifaceted influence on the audiences. And in this regard, we have different explanations that has been put forward to account for how media influences values, attitudes, perceptions, identity, and worldviews. So far, debates over media effects haven't come to a halt. Means since then it hasn't stopped, of course. Rather, we have a number of new explanations that have been cropped up with one purpose, which is to unravel and uncover the multidimensionality of media as a social and cultural construct. Most people, of course, in this regard, accept the idea that the media can influence people. However, the degree of that influence, as well as who is the most influenced or impacted, when, how, and why, have been put or have been the subject of a great debate among many communication and media scholars. Media effects in general refers to the many ways individuals and society may be influenced by both news and entertainment mass media, including a number of media tools like films, like television, radio, newspaper, books, magazines, websites, video games, music, and the list is very long. So after this small introduction, I'm going to talk now about the first point in concerning media effect, which is searching or the search for evidence of the media effects. Media effect has been studied, as I have said before, by many scholars in various domains, of course, in psychology, sociology, political science, anthropology, and education. Many early communication scholars designed to explain the process, and I focus here on the word process, of the media dissemination that was very simple. Media in the old, I think, period it is called one-way type of communication, because, or what we call linear type of communication. It's from one to many, and this is a point of view that has been advanced by Shannon and Weaver, 1949. Shannon and Weaver posits that the medium or message as the cause of the behavioral and emotional and of course the psychological response of that effect. Later, Bryant and Thompson came, of course, to add up some basic notions of this process, of course, that has become more interactive insofar as this process becomes circular. But if we look at the modern conceptualization, however, of the media, it typically this model illustrates a two-way process that is more transactional and interactive in nature. This interaction in which the message or the medium affects the recipient, but the audience in turn influences and shapes the sender. Now we move to the period of the 1920s, course, the 1920s, or I'm sorry, no, now in the period of the 20th century, okay, this concerns a period where propaganda or manipulation by the elite has started to play a paramount role in so far as media effect is concerned. There has been a rising popularity of electronic media, and this leads to the creation of the first theory entitled hypodermic theory. Some people would rather prefer to label it hypodermic syringe or hypodermic needle. Another theory, of course, that has been put forward is called the magic bullet theory. Those theories, I think, attempted to explain that there is only one way of explanation, one way of communication, and these theories, the basic tenets of them, is that they have a powerful effect on helpless audiences. Helpless audiences, of course, mean that they are passive audiences. They don't react to the message, rather they use it without questioning, without even reacting to it. And among the scholars who have talked about these theories, we can say or are Lasswell 1927, Lippmann 1922, among any others, of course. However, while these theories explained in one way or another some behaviors, they did not account for. I spot the light here on the word account for. They did not give an accurate justification for the different responses peoples or individuals may have to the same message source. Here we can talk about Seward-Hall theory of encoding, decoding. We cannot, even if the message is encoded in some way, there is no guarantee that it will be decoded similarly, based of course on various factors related to people, including their background, their values, their norms, their culture in general. So in the 1950s and the 1960s, there has been a new, I would say, tendency in so far as media effect is concerned, and there has been empirical research that has been started to uncover the moderating power, not a complete or absolute power, just moderating power of the predispositions, and peer groups concluding that the media impact was very small. And then I'm making here reference to something very important, which is the limited effect theory. And the basic tenets of this theory is that media hasn't got a huge effect on people, but the effect remains very limited, as it is advanced by Lazarsfeld and Burson and Codit 1944 and Clapper 1960. 70s and 80s, prominent scholars began to look more closely again to the media relationship to knowledge, to opinions, to attitudes, to the levels of violence, concluding that media effect could be significant in some cases, and if not, or even if it is not all powerful, and I put the light here on the word all powerful, scholars came to the conclusion that some vulnerable groups, such as children, may be more heavily influenced by media than others. Something that is really supported by Bryan and Thompson in 2002 and McCombs show 1972 and also McLuhan 1964. But let me tell you this, one of the great difficulty for researchers is, of course, how to measure media effects. This remains a challenging point or element, I think, in media effect, because gauging such an effect is something very difficult insofar as it has many barriers. Of course, I'm speaking here about methodological barriers in research. And so I can say that media consumption may affect a person's thought, emotions or behaviors in ways that could be direct or indirect, immediate or delayed, fleeting or lasting. And it is, of course, impossible for all the scientists to have a complete control for all the mediating factors, from level of consumption to the demographic, or what we call demographics, such as the age, race, socioeconomic status or status, to other, to measure variables like environment and the upbringing values and previous experiences. These are things, I think, that control I think the effect and are responsible for making differences and sometimes similarities among different types of media effect research. I think the next point in this presentation concerns the audiences. And I have said before that there are two types of audiences: passive audiences and active audiences. Passive audiences related to media effect, or to understand the media effects at the beginning, it is first very critical to consider how media are used and for what purposes, communication, what purposes. And scholars in this regard have traditionally fallen into these two tendencies that I have just talked to you about, which are the passive and active audiences. I think we can even talk about two tendencies, namely the functionalist and the culturalist. Sometimes they are called the critical culturalists. For the functionalists, they believe that media audience tends to be in control and active, okay, of the media content, of course. For the critical and the culturalists, they believe that the audience has less control on what they see or what they view, and is therefore more passive. The balance may lie somewhere in the middle and may vary from, of course, one environment to another environment, from one country to another country, from one culture to another culture. And rather than concerning itself with what media does to people, another theory that is labeled uses and gratification theory looks at what people do with the media. What people do with the media rather than what media do to people. And this aphorism of what people do with the media is the essence of the uses and gratifications theory. And the theory, of course, posits that individuals actively choose the media they use and they actively do with it actually do so with a specific goals in mind. This idea is supported by Plumber and Katz 1974. The goals of, sometimes we call them goals, sometimes we call them motivations, sometimes we call them gratifications, and those gratifications may be different for different people. It can include various motivations or various gratifications, including entertainment, information, relief of boredom or escapism, introspection or insight, finding models for behavior, seeking reinforcement for beliefs or values, serving as a basis for conversation and social interaction, helping to either identify with others or to avoid interaction with them, and so on and so forth. This is, I think, to my mind, what McQuail 2005 has stipulated. So in general, I would conclude by saying that the functionalists emphasize the audience's cognition and choices. For the second, I think within the same line of thought, talking about the critical and the culturalist scholars, they believe that the uses and gratifications theory, if you would like to criticize it, we say that it fails to account for the socio-cultural factors. First, they take issue with assumption that open and active media choices are available to all individuals. This is something which is not true. And secondly, they believe that the functionalist approach may minimize the impact of the dominant cultural or transnational powers in presenting choices that serve to reinforce existing elites. And I think that additional concern insofar as media effect theories, where the uses and gratification, or where the audiences can be considered to be active users of the media, and if we accept the idea that people are neither coerced nor manipulated and have full control over their media consumption, I would conclude by saying that policymakers may tend to be less attentive to and critical of media content and power. Thank you very much. The next point that I'm going to talk about concerns the various media effects and their responsibility and their relationship, I would say, with creating a specific worldview. And I will talk about different types of theories or elements, like priming, like agenda setting, like framing, the cultivation, mainstreaming, disinhibitory effect, and the mean word syndrome attitude advanced by Gerbner in his theory of the cultivation theory. Thank you very much for this first part of media effects. Wait for me for the second part concerned the media effect theories. Thank you.